Okay, hello everyone, welcome back. In this video, I'll be discussing what a reflex act and a nerve impulse conduction is. Now, what is a reflex act and what is a reflex action? A reflex action is a fast, automatic, and unpredictable response to a stimulus, specific stimulus. That's what a reflex action is. Now, a reflex action takes place through a reflex arc. A reflex arc is just like a pathway or a route through which a reflex action takes place. And we'll be discussing the reflex arc here. Now, this is the diagrammatic representation of a reflex arc. For example, when you touch a hot object, let's use an example of when you touch a hot object, you use your skin to touch the hot object. What happens is that you pick signals. The heat that you touch is a stimulus. So the stimulus will trigger a nerve impulse through the neuron at the surface, at the level of the skin. Now, at the level of the skin, you have the sensory neuron. You pick the heat, then the heat now, which is the stimulus, will generate an action potential, which is the nerve impulse that will be conducted through the sensory neuron, which is at the level of the skin. Normally, sensory neurons are found at sense organs. Now, on the skin, we have the sensory receptors. Even in the eyes, we have sensory neurons. All the sense organs will have sensory neurons. So, when that happens, the impulse needs to move towards the central nervous system. When it moves towards the central nervous system, it has to be processed by the central nervous system. Then an effect needs to be done towards the peripheral nervous system, towards where that stimulus acted. Now, the skin the stimulus acts on the skin. The impulse is produced, which is carried by the sensory neuron now towards the spinal cord. Now, a reflex action, the brain does not realize that a reflex action is taking place. It means that the spinal cord is the only part of the central nervous system that takes part in this. So what happens is that the sensory neuron carries the impulses towards the central nervous system, precisely the spinal cord. Now, in the spinal cord, we have what we call the interneuron or the relay neuron that will carry the information from the sensory neuron towards the motor neuron. Which is the one which will carry the effect. Now, the movement of that impulse from the skin, from the peripheral nervous system towards the central nervous system is what we call the afferent route or the dorsal route. The movement of the processed information. Now, what happens is that the central nervous system will process the information brought by the sensory neuron and know that what the skin has touched a hot object. So the muscle of the skin the muscle around the skin needs to contract so that that part that was touching the hot object needs to be removed from the hot object. So what happens is that the central nervous system has processed. Now, in the central nervous system, precisely the spinal cord, will have the interneuron or the relay neuron that will carry the information now and transmit. That's the processed information, and transmit through the ventral route and through the efferent pathway. The motor neuron now will carry the information and bring to the muscle so that an effect can take place, so that the muscle can contract and the skin is pulled away from that stimulus. This is basically a reflex act. That's the pathway through which a reflex action takes place. From the sensory neuron to the interneuron, the central nervous system, the efferent, the motor neuron. That's basically a reflex act. Okay. We'll be seeing the differences between the sensory, relay, and motor neuron. Now, from the reflex arc we just saw, we already saw the uses of the sensory neuron. The sensory neuron is used to pick the signals or the stimulus. Now, the relay neuron is found in the central nervous system, which is sensory neuron carries information from where the stimulus is found towards the central nervous system, mostly the peripheral nervous system towards the central nervous system. Now, the relay neuron now transmit the information that was carried by the sensory neuron to the motor neuron, because the relay neuron is found in the central nervous system, precisely in the spinal cord. Now, the motor neuron now carries the processed information from the spinal cord towards the periphery so that an effect can take place. So, the pathway traveled by the sensory neuron, we call it the afferent pathway. Then the pathway traveled by the motor neuron, we call it the efferent pathway. Okay, this is the basic structure of a neuron. We have a neuron of a nerve cell. We have the dendrites, we have the nucleus, the cell body, then we have the axon, we have the soma, the body, we have the node of Ranvier, these junctions in between the two myelin sheet. Now we have the Schwann cells that used to produce the myelin sheet. Now one of these sheets is called a myelin sheet, and it's very important in conduction, as we'll be seeing in the later parts of this video. Now there are basically two types of nerve cells. We have the myelinated neurons and we have the non-myelinated neurons. This is actually a myelinated neurons because the axon is made up of myelin sheet. Now here we have what we call the axon terminals. This is the basic structure of a nerve cell or a neuron. Okay, when you look here, we are looking at the difference between myelinated and non-myelinated neuron. This is a non-myelinated neuron. It means that what the axon, right, has no myelin sheet. This is a myelinated neuron. The axon has myelin sheet, and the myelin sheet is produced by the cells called Schwann cells. These are the two types of neurons, and we'll be discussing how nerve impulse is conducted across the axon of an unmyelinated neuron and across the axon of a myelinated neuron. We'll be seeing the differences. Okay, here we'll be seeing action potential and nerve impulse conduction. Now, what is action potential? Action potential is the same as nerve impulse, right? What happens is that when the stimulus acts on the body, when the stimulus acts on the sensory neuron, an action potential must be generated before that information is carried by the sensory neuron towards the central nervous system. Now, first of all, what happens is that when the sensory neuron carries the information, it transmits it to the relay neuron at the junction we call the synapse, which we may see in a later video. We'll discuss the synapse as a whole because it's very broad. Now, action potential is just a rapid change in the membrane potential of a nerve cell. Normally, a nerve cell, the membrane potential of a nerve cell is normally negative 70. Negative 70. It means that we have a net positive charge on the outside of the membrane. We'll have a net negative charge in the outside. We'll represent a positive charge by sodium ion. We'll represent a negative charge by potassium ion. Now, what happens is that we have more positive charges outside of the axon. What we are representing here is the axon of a nerve cell. This is mostly the axon of a non-myelinated neuron. Okay. On the outermost part of that membrane, we have more positive charges. In the innermost part, we have more negative charges. That is why moving from outside to inside, the potential is negative 70. That's the resting membrane potential. So when no nerve impulse is being conducted, what happens is that the membrane potential of the axon of the nerve cell is at negative 70. So when a stimulus just triggers, first of all, a nerve impulse moves from the dendrite through the axon, then through the axon terminal. We are discussing how nerve impulse or action potential takes place around the axon here. That's what we are discussing. Okay. So, first of all, what happens is that when the stimulus first acts on the dendrite of the sensory neuron, what happens is that there's something known as the all or nothing law. Since the membrane potential is negative 70 millivolt, what happens is that if the membrane potential doesn't increase to negative 55 millivolt, there will be no action potential conduction or no nerve impulse conduction. So a stimulus can act on the nerve cell unless unless the membrane potential drops to negative 55 millivolt, there will be no action potential. That's what we call the all or nothing law. So what happens is that when the stimulus has acted and the nerve and the membrane potential drops from negative 70 millivolt to negative 55 millivolt, action potential starts to conduct. Now, how does action potential conduct? There's what we call how does the axon conduct nerve impulses. There's what we call